Good evening, everybody. It is Women's History Month. So you know what that means. It is all about women empowerment and about getting you the power, because you have the power in the workplace, at home. If you're watching on Facebook, wherever you are, on the bus, in your living room, make sure you comment and ask a question, because tonight we're bringing her back. Barbie Winterbottom. We loved her so much. She has a newsletter and a podcast with already thousands of people joining in because they want to talk about the whole topic of gaining confidence in the workplace. And boy, do I need this as well. Don't we all need this right now? Climbing up that corporate ladder, getting the jobs that you want, making sure that your voice is heard. Isn't that what it's all about? But first, listen to this.
Monica Makes It Happen is sponsored by London Disability, dedicated to helping the disabled get Social Security benefits.
All right, thank you. And we're back and we're live with Barbie Winterbottom. I had you last time and we just fell in love with you because everything you said resonated with our Facebook audience. It is all about knowing that the power is within and making sure to tap into that energy, right? Well, I heard you have a newsletter and a podcast with already, thousands of subscribers?
Yeah, so it's great. And thank you for having me back. It's wonderful to be here and to see you again and to with all your viewers. In the past couple of weeks, I launched a new segment of my business, and it's called The Executive Woman. And as an executive woman myself, who's worked for the past 20 years in the corporate world, I went through some things and had different experiences, but the higher up you go, and I was at the C-suite level, the higher up you go, the more isolated and lonely you become at work. The things you talk about are confidential. The information you're exposed to, you can't share. And a lot of people in your life simply don't understand what it's like to be a woman in the C-suite or in the executive space. So we find ourselves longing for community, longing for someone to understand who we are, what we're about, and that we are more than our job title. We have lives outside of that. A phrase I say is, we don't hang our humanity at the door when we clock in for work. We are still the same people, and yet we're not recognized in the same way. So I launched the podcast, I launched the newsletter, and it's really about creating that sense of community and helping to validate the feelings we all have because they're very real.
Many women are watching. I want them to chime in and tell us their stories because, experiencing sexism, getting to the top, there's so many things that we can talk about tonight. But I just spoke with Vera Moore, the CEO of a cosmetics line. She's the first of many things, but an amazing woman. But she talked about how women are like tea bags. The hotter it gets, the stronger we get. And I feel like we go through so much as women, and so much expected. The first question I want to ask you is there still sexism? And what do you hear from women? You must hear you have so many good stories.
I do. I interview a lot of women throughout my day, whether it's on camera or off camera, and now on the podcast. And what I started hearing, the more they felt safe, is that I have not yet interviewed one woman who hasn't experienced some level of sexual harassment or sexism in the workplace. There's a perception that because we had the big Me Too movement, that kind of solved for that problem. It did not solve for that problem. So these things are still happening to us. There's also this concept of what's called the double bind. Women, as we go up through the ranks, we're perceived as lucky. We got a lucky break. She knew somebody. It was lucky that they knew her and they let her in the door. But when we make mistakes, it's because we're not credible or we're not competent. Conversely, when men rise up through the ranks, they're competent and smart. And when they make a mistake, it's considered an unlucky break. So we're still facing these unfair and unequal standards and perceptions in the workplace because that's what we've been conditioned to believe, both men and women, right? When you think about it, when you're a young girl, and a boy pushes you or punches you on the when you're outside at recess, what have we all been told? Oh, it's probably because he likes you. No, that's not acceptable. That behavior is not acceptable, but it's perpetuated throughout his life and our lives as women to accept bad behavior and to be nice. In my newsletter, I put in there, what if young girls were taught how to set boundaries just as much as they were taught to be nice? Wouldn't the world be different?
Wow. I really, that's a tweetable. That's on Facebook. I'm sure a lot of people are resonating with that. Is it obvious, or what does that look like now? What does sexism look like now?
It isn't that different than it ever was. I can give you an example. I interviewed a woman several weeks ago who works in the medical device sales industry, and she recruits the sales team. So these folks go into hospitals, they work with orthopedic surgeons. Every woman she onboards as a sales representative in the medical device world, during orientation, they establish a safe word. They establish a safe word because it is so common, and everyone knows it, but nobody shares it publicly. It is so common for women in medical device sales to be sexually harassed, even into the space of being unsafe and fearing for her safety, that they establish the safe word. She texts the safe word to her team, so the team will pick up the phone and call and say, hey, you're needed in surgery at such and such a hospital with Dr. So-and-so, because that's the only way she can actually leave the situation. That's a very real example of what's happening today.
It's like gaining the confidence to ask and to get what you're worth. It is an exercise. It's like working the muscles that you want to go in there and to really, so many times I know I have to pump myself up, not just mentally, but also physically. Like, I can do this. How do we get that confidence?
I think one thing is to really understand, your stuff, right? You have credibility. You are worthy of being in that space. You didn't get there because you were lucky. You got there because you earned it. And feel pride in that. There's also things to do when you think about the way in which you communicate. We need to communicate with much stronger, assertive language. And I don't necessarily mean aggressive, but assertive. Instead of saying, I should do X, Y, and Z, or I need to, simply say, I am. I'm leaving at 5 today. I'll catch up with everybody in the morning. Or the data tells me this, versus, well, I believe we should do this. We have to speak language that is positive and instills confidence and credibility, because we have it. We just don't always display it. We often apologize before we insert ourselves. I hear this all the time from women in meetings. I don't want to offend anyone, but have we considered this? Or I might be wrong, but what about this? Do away with that. No, simply say what you have to say. Don't discredit yourself before you share what you have to share.
I love that. I'm guilty of saying all of those things. 37% of women leaders have had coworkers get credit for their work. This is such a big deal, right? Compared to 27% of men a lot of times take credit immediately. And we're more of the team players, I think.
Mm-hmm.
How can we get out of that? And how do we create those firm boundaries that you're talking about?
So I've had this happen to me on more than one occasion. There's a couple of things. Every scenario is different, right? And so you have to read your audience, read your room, and know where your safe spaces are. There can be times that in the moment when someone is presenting your work as theirs, you might assert yourself and say, well, hey, Tom, when I shared that with you last week, I thought we also talked about this. So you're just putting it out to the room that this was something that you shared with him before he was sharing it with the rest of the world. You can also address it privately after the meeting, which I've done that as well. I've pulled, a CEO aside and said, hey, I suggested this 3 months ago. You literally laughed about it in a meeting, and now this gentleman suggests the same thing, and you're ready to implement it. Tell me where I went wrong with that. And put it back on him to explain to me why.
I'm going to have you write all my scripts for
I'd love to. Another thing I want to share is when we're in meetings and we hear other people saying things that are inappropriate or dismissing other women in the room, I want you guys to start thinking about phrases you can use. As an example, what did you mean by the comment you made to Ellen this morning? That felt uncomfortable. Why did you say that? What was your intention with that? Or can you tell me why you made that comment about me? It wasn't appropriate in that moment, and I'm very concerned as to your intentions. Making the person who's misbehaving own their behavior is what we have to start doing. We're not responsible for how they respond to us. We're only responsible for what we put out into the world. And we allow people to get away with so much bad behavior because we don't want to be perceived as rigid or hard to work with, or all the ugly words that people will assign to women who assert themselves. But there are ways to do it in an assertive way, in a confident way. And then the last tip in communicating is silence is your friend when used appropriately. When you say something like that to someone, stop talking. We get nervous and try to fill in the empty space. And as soon as you do that, you're losing credibility. So challenging someone to say, I'm not comfortable where this conversation is going. We either need to redirect, or I'll come back when we're ready to start it again. You're done. You wait until someone responds, or you choose to leave.
You're amazing. You're absolutely. I got so much from believe it or not, we are wrapping up. And what I always love to do is end with, if there's one thing you want the men and women watching to get from this important show, what would it be?
It would be that we have made progress, but not nearly the progress we might believe we've made, because I hear the stories each and every day. Men can be our best advocates. Men are fathers, they are husbands, they are brothers. If they care about the women in their lives, they need to step forward as an advocate and help everyone else understand the challenges that we face and be that voice of support. We need that. We deserve that. Women make up more than half the workforce right now. Women are graduating at higher rates with higher GPAs than men around the world. So it's not that we're not capable. The doors are just not opening because we don't have the advocacy we need and we deserve to have.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And everyone watching, I got so much from you tonight, especially launching Women's History Month. I think it's so important to talk about these issues, real practical advice that we can use now in our next meeting, at home, on the phone, our conference, our Zooms. So important, just the words that we choose, and then feeling that we are enough and that we're more than enough. We're probably overqualified for the position that we're in, which I'm starting to learn now in my older age. Thank you so much again, Barbie Winterbottom. And I want to remind everyone, she has a podcast now with thousands of people who've joined just in the first few weeks. So again, it's an executive podcast and a newsletter, and we're going to have all that information where we can link to that. Thank you so much again, Ms. Winterbottom, for joining us. And as of course, everybody knows, they can reach out to us here at Pix 11 and watch us every night at 4, 5, 6, and 10. We are always making it happen for you. You're always our priority. And again, happy Women's History Month.